Okay, we are recording now. I want to just start off by apologizing to the people who are listening. I usually bring my earbuds, and that gives me a microphone right next to my mouth. But I left them at home, so sorry about that. Hopefully we'll get a good recording, but that's why. Turn up the volume. Welcome to everybody, and especially those people that are here for the first time. Don't you hate that? Because that's what they say at church. Welcome to everyone that's here for the first time.
Can you stand up and greet the people
Right.
around?
Yeah. Would you like to introduce yourselves? So we can talk about you?
We're the visitor tag.
Yeah, visitor tags, you know.
Be sure to sign the ritual of friendship that we are now.
Yeah, so we can call you later.
Phone number, address, and credit card number.
This was a bad idea to start with disclaimers, but I can't help myself. So I'm even less prepared than I normally am. Partly because last time I had so much prepared, this much prepared, and we got to this much. And so I always forget how rich this material is and how much people want to interact with it. So I want to leave lots of space for that. We're talking about some really important issues when we're talking about the warrior energy, that it brings up a lot of questions for people, and I want to invite all of those. Not that I know the answer, but we can certainly talk about it, and I can just make stuff up while I'm standing here. Really good at that. That's the first reason. The second disclaimer is, of all of the four, this is probably my wussiest, least developed quadrant. And so I always feel a little like apologetic when I'm standing up here talking to people about these things, when I know it's something I'm really trying to understand and integrate and embody myself. So I think what we'll do is talk through what is the warrior. Let me just do this little diagram just so you remember who's who in relation to whom. Because they're on kind of a polarity. If you're interested in more information about this, I want to say, and I want to keep saying, if you have been exposed to this material anywhere, it's because of Tom Daly. Just so you know, he owns the material. Like he sort of developed it into a way of understanding things and walking through things and implementing it. So he generously teaches people all over the place, including me, and and I've been under his teaching for a long time and working through some of these concepts in my personal life and in my professional life. So, but it all kind of comes from him. And so you can find him at livingartsfoundation.org or fourgatewayescoaching.org. So that just sort of alleviates my guilt. It's always kind of annoying when you come up with a concept and everybody sort of appropriates it and owns it for themselves. So yeah. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the foundation and the concepts behind these. I just wanted you to kind of see the diagram and the relationship. So sovereign and warrior are on a polarity, and magician and lover are on a polarity. And I might use this diagram later. When it comes, so I want to talk about who is a warrior, what does it do, what does it want, what does it need, how does it feel, some of those kinds of things. And then particularly I want to talk about boundaries, anger, and power today, because I think that's kind of the heart of the warrior energy. And so let's just get started. The warrior is the part of us that gets things done. That the warrior is the implementer. The warrior is the doer. So if we're talking about these four archetypes as their function. This sovereign is being, lover is feeling, warrior is doing, and magician is thinking. Maybe that's easier for you to think about that way, and these strange like character names are weird, but we use the archetype because it just makes things come alive a little bit. And so you can think about putting character to it, then you can sort of get a feel for what does a lover look like, feel like, how do they talk, how do they move, how do they, how do they think, what are they motivated by. So the warrior is all about doing, basically, essentially. But it has a lot of services that it provides and a lot of things that it does. So the first thing probably that the boundary is good for in our lives is to set boundaries and limits and to kind of know, to delineate things. It also is a part of us that knows when to initiate, when to stand, and when to end, which seems kind of simplistic, but actually those things are really, really important. So initiation, standing firm, ending. The warrior respects its enemies as training partners, which I thought was really interesting. I wouldn't have come up with that one on my own. The warrior is the part of us that I think learns from adversity and tries to really get grounded in the things that are coming against us. And so those enemies, so to speak, are teachers. I almost said respects enemies as teachers, and that sounded too much like teachers are our enemies. So I won't say that. The warrior is not afraid to end things. Actually, in the list I was looking at, it says it's not afraid to kill. Typically, we don't have to be making those kinds of decisions, but we do all the time have to think about, when is this over? When do I end this? How is this, can this be done now? When? Is it okay? Kind of thing. So the part of you that needs to know that, that's your warrior. And then the ability to actually follow through, that's your warrior. The warrior is a part of us that believes that less is better. And the only way I know how to understand that is that it just cuts through the crap. And it probably, I think for me, in my thinking, we can generate a lot of ideas and emotions and concepts, but really when it comes to action, you just kind of cut through the crap. So okay, so what?
Now what?
Now what? Yeah. So less of that other stuff in some situations is better. It can strategize, although the magician does a lot of strategizing too. But when it comes to implementation, the magician can come up with all kinds of stuff and all kinds of plans. But when you're actually connecting the part of you that actually needs to get things done, you need your warrior part, and then the input of that energy toward your plan is really important because.
So does the warrior come into play with looking at what the magician has, dreamed up and say, okay, this seems doable. I'll act on that.
Yeah, I think that's.
Is that kind of the partnership relationship?
I think that's that's basically it. Yeah.
Okay.
Or here's
So-
the first step.
Oh,
Or
okay.
here's the first
okay.
step, or here's how we're
Okay.
gonna start, or
Okay.
or that sounds great, but actually I'm the one that's gonna have to carry this out, so we're gonna change that a little bit, maybe.
Adjust.
The other really important thing about the warrior is it helps assess risk. So anytime you're having to implement something, or you come up with a really good idea, but you find yourself balking at it, then it's good to ask, what's at risk here? If I take this action, what's at risk? And so your instinctive nature is another synonym maybe for warrior energy. So what's in your body and what's in your instinctive mammalian, existence. So sometimes we think certain things are a great idea, but once we start to implement, we kind of hit a wall. And that usually means that there's some part of you that is worried about what else is at risk. And so the warrior has an instinctive knowing about that. Because one of the major functions of the warrior is to defend and protect all the rest of you. So if you come up with some plan, but you don't know how the rest of you is going to take it, you're going to feel that as resistance right away. And so it helps to then start thinking about what's going on here. Why am I resisting? What's happening? And it's usually because your warrior is worried about what you're having to trade off, or how that's going to affect some other part of you, or whether it can actually be pulled off. So risk assessment is really important. And it's one of those things we don't think about, especially when it comes to, I'm just trying to think of good examples that aren't my own, but I have I think because of my conflicted relationship with my own warrior, I have a lot of resistance. Some of it is just part of my personality. The 9 personality in the Enneagram is just like bolder. And so it's easy to misunderstand that as laziness or inattention or dissociation or some of those things. But when I listen to that, when I honor that, it's usually because there's some conflict that affects the rest of me that I haven't yet brought to my consciousness. So, yeah.
Oh no, I'm just
okay.
excited.
And this is a little secret. I mean, I think I have a couple years ago. I thought I'm gonna specialize in psychotherapy with the 9 personality. I am gonna crack that code, and I'm gonna help people move forward. That was my. Then I started doing it, like they started coming to me, and I just want to bang my head against the wall. Because that profound stuckness is just so frustrating. And I know what it is for me, but when you're trying to help somebody who's, it's hard. But the key, but I have, in doing so, I have really reaffirmed my theory that resistance really is risk assessment and protection, and just not understanding or bringing conscious the different inner conflicts that are going on there. So if we can bring language to that and validation to that, then usually things clear up. That kind of foggy, muddy, heavy stuckness begins to thaw and begins to move forward. So if any of the rest of your types are experiencing some of that, that's why risk assessment is really important. But you have to bring some compassion to it. You have to have a belief that people aren't just being stupid. There are plenty of stupid people in the world, but usually you won't be interacting with them directly, and they probably won't be coming for help. So if they're a friend of yours, they're probably not just plain stupid or lazy or whatever. There's usually some kind of underlying conflict going on, and we're just not used to listening to that. We're not used to listening more deeply than the way that we've been taught to listen. And so we don't know, we put things into categories that don't fit. So when you ask yourself, when you see yourself going, well, I want this, but I'm not getting there, I keep making choices this way, and it's not getting me here, then one question you can ask is, well, what's at risk if you do this? What are you protecting? What's at risk? So it could be, I'm worried that my friends won't understand, or I'm worried that I won't be able to defend myself against retractors, or I'm worried that I'll take a step but then I don't know what else to do and I'll fail, or I'm worried that I'll succeed and then I have a whole different problem. I don't know how to be with myself if I'm successful. So it's hard to flush those things up, but when you think about assessing risk and thinking about risk, it sort of gives it a little bit of room to speak, and then you can start to listen differently. That's a puzzled face.
Me?
Yeah.
No, it was,
Okay.
it was,
Okay, good.
it was, I'm excited.
That's your resting, excited face?
Yeah, she's assessing risk right now.
I hate, yeah.
I do have a question about this. This is so timely. I literally spent an hour in therapy on Friday talking about
Oh,
yesterday,
okay.
Thursday, whenever talking about this. But, so, what if you have a different, what if it's not immediately conscious that fear of taking a step isn't necessarily about the facts of the moment? You know, your brain is telling you it's about the facts of the moment, but in fact, it's an underlying trigger that just hasn't been flushed out yet that's keeping you from making that assessment. And so your risk assessment is saying, oh yeah, well it's because this, and this, and that all seems rational, but the real truth of the matter is that it's about something that's, you know, buried down there on some cellular level that tells you that not getting approval from this person is just really gonna wipe you out,
Yeah.
for example. How do you discern, that, you know, the warrior that is doing the risk assessment, I mean, you know, decision-making is often a stuck process because of that.
Yeah. That's a really good question and a really hard one to just answer theoretically, because it is the only question. How do you discern? How do you know what's really coming up? So ways to discern are ways to discern are when you hit a thing like that, like a barrier or a conflict or like a stuck place or whatever, then if you're not used to listening for that language, start with your body. That's always a good place to start. So when you feel this way, what are you experiencing in your body? Although that's also a hard one because we don't usually connect with our bodies. We're like, what do you mean what do I feel in my body? I'm sitting here, what are you talking about? And a lot of times we don't feel something, we don't feel something in our body. So is it here that you're feeling the conflict? Is it here that you're feeling the conflict? Are you feeling like you want to run or fight or sit or lay down or just faint? What is it? If you can start with your body, that's great, because then it kind of gets you out of the theoretical, and so your magician doesn't just make shit up, which is what it's really good at. And you can kind of go with the sensation, so you're listening bottom up. So that sometimes helps. And then if you give it a voice, so you can do this journaling. You know, like if I listen to that tight place in my gut, if I were that, what would I say? And just kind of go, well, hey, how's it going?
Kind of tight here.
Kind of tight here. What the hell are you thinking? I mean, I don't know. That's a hard one too. If you're not used to doing that, it feels kind of stupid. But actually, it's really more powerful than you think it is, if you can let yourself do it. The other thing is, if you're and the best way to do it is if you're in the warrior, you want to think about, well, this is why I like to assign like body dispositions to each of the types, so that you can put your body in that position, and it sometimes sort of lights up the part of your brain that is used to taking action, or used to, it sort of like turns the light on in that part of your brain. So, for example, magician, body disposition is kind of lightness and sparkiness. So all the energy is up here, and it feels really snappy and really sparkly and really creative and stimulated. That's the best of the magician. It could be also worried and other things, but all the energy is up here in the body. So if we're doing magician, then I just have people go like this. Lover is in the heart. So the body disposition for lover is open. So you pull your chest open like that, so that your heart actually has to kind of come to the forefront. So when that happens, it signals that part of your brain, hopefully, and helps you kind of go, helps you feel. So it's not magic, but it sometimes happens. So when you're in warrior, there's a couple different stances, I think, with warrior. If you think about a soldier at attention, you could do that one, or advancing. So when you lean forward and move forward and sort of zero in on where you're going, that energy kind of moving forward might help you listen differently to what your warrior wants to say. And so then you let it talk. You can do that journaling, or you can stand. When you do 4 Gateways coaching, it helps, this body stuff really helps, because we want to get you like so you stand find what's the south wall, stand at the south wall and turn around, get into your warrior stance, and then just start talking and see what comes out. It doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be accurate, you just start talking from that energy. If you can feel it in your body, it helps. So, I don't know if that helps you.
One more, sovereign.
Oh, and sovereign is, the body disposition for that is groundedness. And so usually, if I'm working with somebody, if they're standing, then I want to have them kind of centered and then deeply rooted. So then your knees are a little bit soft, but you're thinking about being a tree, basically, and all of your roots are like digging deeply into the earth so that you're immovable. So you go to your center and then drive your energy down, or think about driving your energy down, so that you can't be moved and you are centered and grounded and rooted. If you're sitting, then you can sit upright in the king or queen chair. So think about sitting on the throne and how you would sit if you were actually the king or queen. You would be slouching, you'd be sitting up straight, and that energy again would be moving down into the earth. And so and from down here, this is the center of the sovereign, is the gut. So, does that make sense? So these are just little tools, and it's not instant, because we're not used to thinking this way, moving this way, listening this way. So be prepared to feel stupid for a long, long time and not hear anything. But but try it, because that is the question. How do you discern it? How do you know it? And the other thing is, it's not necessary to correctly identify each of the energies. Now, is this really sovereign energy? Is this warrior energy? Is this what, am I doing this right? Or is that the right thing? Or is that the right definition? Guess who that is?
Magician.
Yep, trying to control it. So you can't solve everything with your head, but you have to use your head sometimes, so it gets a little tricky. That's what makes it hard. Because we're trying to listen for something, but we're used to giving the magician all the rein, and so then it sometimes will co-opt all your stuff and then pretend or act like or think up. That's why certain people that I know don't like to go to therapy, because I already know, or I think I know, and I think I know what they're going to say, and I think I know what they want me to say, and I think I know how I should be feeling, and I think I know all that stuff. So it makes me crazy. It makes me kind of sick. So I had to kind of get out of any modalities that were, because if that was going to help, I'd have fixed myself by now. Honestly, if my magician could have fixed me, I'd be fixed by now. Okay, so
I think the process of that journaling you were talking about reminds me of when we did the whole,
Yeah,
archery
Jungian,
thing.
what did she call it?
Archetypes?
Yeah, but the process,
Yeah.
Jungian journaling, I
Yeah,
guess,
yeah. I think
where you
that's
just take on the voice,
But I
put
think
yourself
that
in.
the biggest part of that was the most powerful to me, and I feel like that could help with this, once you connect with what that feeling is, say you step forward and like, okay, what I keep coming up against is actually fear. So then for you to sit down and actually have that conversation with fear, that was the most powerful part of that journaling process, and be like, hey fear, what's up?
Yeah.
And fear going, well, this is blah, blah, and that process for some reason to me was really super powerful in the movement in that.
Yeah, it's, I was surprised. So what we're talking about is a facilitated workshop we did with a woman who uses archery and Jungian journaling, which was just like, I never would have thought. But, and what I loved about that, the archery part, warrior. So what happened was we identified an issue that had been troubling us that we wanted to focus on. And so you allow yourself to feel that and identify what that is. For me, it was grief, ambiguous grief. I was grieving over a situation that I wasn't actually directly, well, I was involved. All I could tell was that I was just carrying on this grief I didn't understand. And I forget all the steps, but one of them is once you kind of identify what that is and how you got there and kind of connect the dots of all the times you felt like this in your life, then you open a dialogue, journaling wise, with the thing. So I was like, okay, grief, what the hell? You know, why? I don't get this. And what is up? Immediately, it came to my mind, well, it's not your grief. Just like that, kaboom, like over. It's not yours. And I was like, of course, it's not mine. It belongs to everybody else. It belongs mostly to my mother. So my job was carrying all of her sadness and all of her grief. And this particular grief was probably the grief of her entire life. And I was somehow connected to that, and it had to do, it's just a long, complicated story. It had to do with 2 deaths that, the last of which I was sort of involved with, and it was her son, my half-brother. So he died before I really got to know him, and I was carrying around this terrible grief about that, more than what seemed logical. And then as soon as that, I heard that in my mind, it's not yours, then immediately I knew which part was mine. There was some sadness there. I would have liked to have known him. We, had just started to get reconnected. We exchanged maybe 6 emails. Didn't even get to talk to him on the phone. I was excited about going up to visit him last summer, and he just effing died on me, kaboom, all of a sudden. And so that's sad, right? But the cloud that was hanging over me was just this whole thing I was trying to carry for somebody else. And so cutting through all of that and doing a direct conversation with it, in my mind, as stupid as it sounds, was the thing. And so then making that my target and then being able to shoot an arrow at it, I just thought, holy crap, this is the fastest, most powerful, best thing since sliced bread. And didn't cost me that much, so that was good. That was good. I could just work myself out of a job by referring everybody out to other modalities. Okay, so risk assessment. Any other questions or things like that?
I've been thinking the whole time, and I think you sort of answered it, but what if you just assess the risk nonstop? It's not that you can't get in touch with what the risk is, it's that it's just, then is there any point where you put blinders on the warrior and give him a little kick,
Well, if you're always assessing the risk, then the problem lies in one of the other quadrants. Because the warrior always wants to act, but if it feels like lover is going to be hurt by that, then you got to work with your lover. Does that make sense? So, or if it's a lack of courage, or if it's fear or something, then you work with those kinds of things. But I guess in general, if you're constantly stuck in the risk assessment, there's, well, we'll talk about stuckness,
And I'm thinking you end up over in your magician too. If you're constantly circling around risk assessing, it's probably not the warrior anymore.
yeah, if, anytime you're spinning. Yeah. Magician, usually, but if it's for real, and once you've assessed the risk, then your warrior's job is done, then it's somebody else's task to figure that out. Does that make sense? So then, if it's an actual risk, then you come up with a plan. Or if it's a, like a trauma trigger, like something that just gets hooked all the time and you can't get past it, then you need probably some help with that, so that it's not just coming up again. Because if you need to move forward, but what you're proposing to do triggers old trauma where you're still stuck and it's unprocessed, and you have the inside you believe that what was happening is happening, and I can't face that, and I'll never live through that. That's trauma that needs to be moved through with something, you know, some other way to work at that, or which just kind of opens up the whole field of, you know, psychological interventions. That makes sense. Who's from the refuge? Can you? Oh, hey! Come on in.
I'm ready then.
I think you might need to bring a chair though.
Oh, got a good group.
How are you? Okay, so risk assessment. The next thing is the warrior knows that courage equals being willing to face your shadows. So what does that mean?
Look at your weaknesses, acknowledge them,
Being vulnerable.
Not
Yeah,
trying,
it means being vulnerable. It means
trying to push them down.
Not
or
trying-
numb them.
So, facing your shadows. A shadow is anything that we don't want to face. We sort of just put somewhere where we don't have to see it. And so, and that could be good things, that could be bad things. Anything we don't feel like we have the skills or the stuff to face and deal with, usually we kind of stick it where we don't have to look at it. And so, part of the warrior's job then, and as part of the assessment, it's not just risk assessment, but it's assessment of the problem or the battle or the challenge, is what am I not seeing? What am I afraid to face? What am I defending myself against that I actually need? And of course that's connected to respecting enemies as training partners. So your own shadows are kind of like enemies, training partners. Did I say trading partners? Courage is really a not very talked about virtue. And I just want to put a little plug in for courage. That it looks different than we think it should look usually. And for the most part in spiritual growth, personal growth, relational growth, it all has to do with the courage to be vulnerable, which is kind of a paradox. So one of our core fears in being human beings is going back to that feeling of being vulnerable. But until we can actually allow that to happen, we can't allow the goodness to come in and come through. And so the most courageous people are wounded people trying to heal, because they have to go places that they had to run away from a long time ago. And so going back there on purpose takes a lot of guts. And courage comes from that quadrant, comes from the warrior quadrant, and it's fueled by knowing that it's now or never, or you might as well, or something.
I was thinking about the stance of the warrior at attention rather than advancing, and I'm visualizing that coming into what you're saying now, because I think that sometimes, for me, courage isn't about advancing, but it's about just standing still and not running away from.
Yeah.
Being willing to stay at attention.
Yeah.
And so, I think that, you know, in terms of facing shadows, which are often very scary, sometimes just not numbing or running, but just standing still
Mhm.
is enough.
Yeah, yeah, when you do that, you can feel it. So when I talk about, when we are dismantling the tyranny of the magician and the constant spinning and the needing to know, needing to control, needing to predict, needing to worry 100 times and create these disaster drills, lots of different scenarios that we go through, before we actually face the thing. That's why the words of David White really caught me that one time when he said, develop a relationship with the unknown. Well, what that meant to me was, I give up the right to know or think I know, or give up the illusion of knowing and predicting and controlling. So when I just quit doing that, what happens is I'm facing the great unknown. And when I face the big unknown, I start to shake, I start to go, oh my God. That's why we would rather spin and drive ourselves crazy than actually learn how to stand in the face of not knowing. And then you find out it's not that hard. You're just standing there. But your whole being wants to shake because, I don't know, we don't like that. We don't like that. Or it reminds us of being vulnerable, not knowing, being a child, having no power, whatever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter why, because if you stand there and shake and then ask yourself, why am I shaking, then you'll get off into a bunch of other thoughts. But just standing in the unknown and letting yourself be that and learning how to do that, that's a practice of desensitization and centering and letting go and finally learning how, with peacefulness, to be in a state of not knowing. So that's how you develop a relationship with the unknown. And so try that next time when your doctor says, we need you to repeat that mammogram, or we found a little something, we need you to come back. That will put you right in that zone. Anytime there's some health thing and you gotta go back, but you can't do it right now. Anyway, you should be developing a relationship with the unknown before that happens because you'll fail. Jenny?
It seems like that's helping to move you into the sovereign,
Yes.
so that those two are kind of working together, even though you said they're kind of polarity.
Right, we'll talk about alliances,
Okay.
hopefully by the end of the day. But yes.
Mine's maybe similar to Jenny's, just the root of the word courage is heart.
Yeah.
And so it's so connected with that heart space and willing to feel. I don't know.
Yeah,
Can you
well,
please talk about
that
that?
reminds me of, so if you're in the Facebook group, the School of Life Facebook group, if you're not, all you have to do is request to be. It's called Phyllis Mathis School of Life, I think. And then just find it and request and we'll let you in. But I posted this video of one of my favorite singer-songwriters, David Wilcox, and he was talking about this incredible, this moment of when he found out his dad was dying. Then he went home and he sat with his dad and then he sang to him for 4 hours and then he died.
Wow.
And just the way he discusses it and the way he carries that lover energy, it's worth watching just for that. The story is marvelous, but being in his presence in a way, this is the quintessential example of what it feels like to be with someone who has done a lot of lover work and had the courage to live with an open heart, and he basically makes his living on that open heart by, you know, creating incredible songs. And another thing that he does, and we'll plug for David Wilcox, is evidently, I didn't know this, but evidently lately he's been doing these, I think he calls them medicine songs. So when we saw him in concert, he kind of just did one, and so, who wants a song? And so this woman raised her hand, and he said, well, what's the issue? And I even forget what it is. But on the spot, what?
It was about his mom.
It was, this man about his mom, somehow wanting to,
Tell her how much he loved her or something.
yeah. So
She was sitting next to him.
he just started singing.
And he just makes
Just
up
made
these
it up.
songs. Yeah.
And as he's doing it, he's feeling it, and then he's creating it, in shaping it into this massive heart gift. So I've never really seen that before. And
He did talk, I think, in that video about how he's just practiced his whole life feeling, letting himself feel. And so if you don't ever do that numbing or pushing down, it's just raw. So when something happens, like your dad's dying, it's natural to just feel it and not run from it.
and be present with it, and then offer it. That's, whew. I thought you must have one hell of a therapist. That's my thought. So anyway, why did we get there? Oh, you were yeah, courage is in the heart, and so when the warrior is assisting the lover, then it's helping to strategize and find that courage and stand there, you know.
Well, and it seems like the warrior energy is that readiness too, to stand against or for or accepting whatever. And that's the part that is like the warrior that does his drills, and he knows, you know, I can trust these motions, this sword play, or
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
You've drilled, and he's practiced that
Yeah.
for his whole life, so that when this comes, whatever the courage required to face what is unknown, you're ready.
Yeah. That's a really good point too, because, and this is just an analogy, I guess, but that's why people do martial arts training, that's why they do, and why they go through boot camp. You know, they teach people to kill people, right? So you have to go through all of these motions and marching and listening to orders, and the whole training of a warrior is to create a pathway from certain cues to certain actions, so that it kind of circumvents the natural barriers against fighting, right? So
Muscle memory.
it's muscle memory, or to be so attuned to your commander, so to speak, that you'll run into the guns or whatever. I do not understand war very well, but I think what we're talking about is if you can learn to practice certain things and practice them in peacetime, then you have access to them in challenge time. And so that's why we talk about these things, in particular the warrior, so that we know how to act, and we can act effectively when we need to. I'm just going to finish up these.
Could one just keep spinning and spinning and spinning for each one, and you can appreciate them as they are, that's fine. But you could spin like a tornado, basically, until your life is characterized by just spinning through them.
Through the quadrants?
Each one.
Yeah, you could. You could. The goal is that all of those four energies are integrated and healthy and accessible. And so you can kind of figure out where you need work and how, maybe get some ideas on how to do that. But basically the purpose of the warrior is to serve authority, so like the sovereign, and hopefully, and to serve the greater good, the good of the whole. And it's there to defend and protect all the rest, and it's characterized by some kind of discipline, some kind of skill in being able to execute. Anything else about this list? So making it practical for us means we should talk about these three things. Well, let me just do this. I don't even know why I have that up there. But its job is to execute, and the gateway to the warrior is usually anger. Last time we talked about the gateway to lover is grief. It's just one of the most powerful emotions. Usually we don't get connected with our warrior unless we're angry, unless we feel angry. And you don't have to be angry to execute, but for some of us who are like wussy warriors, it's one of the most important things there. So, boundaries. Raise your hand if you had way too many talks about boundaries. What do you want to say about them? What do we want to know about boundaries?
Gotta have them.
Gotta have them.
How not to suck at them?
How not to suck at them. I don't know how not to suck at them, actually, somebody could tell me.
They can be flexible.
And they can be flexible, yeah, yeah.
What stands in the way of making?
What stands in the way of making boundaries? Wussiness. No, I don't know.
Well, like you were talking about the grief that you're carrying for your mom, I would think that would make it hard to have a boundary between you and your mom in some ways, because you're carrying the same grief. Like having those kind of things coming at you from other people can sometimes get in the way of making kind of a firm boundary. So
Yep.
at least I've experienced
Yeah, that's a good point. And that was kind of what happened. I didn't think about it, but that's a good characterization of what actually happened. It helped me find the boundary between me and my mother, which I never had, which children never have until they're, a certain age. Then they learn that they're separate from their mother. But for some reason, I never really got the message, for all kinds of reasons. It was the way I could stay connected to her, was to try to at least feel for her all the sadness and grief that she was feeling. And it was something I could do for her that kept me connected to her even after she died. So,
And nines merge, and
And we
nines are
merge, yes.
starving and craving connection, so.
yes. Yeah, the 9 personality on the Enneagram has considerable problem with boundaries, because our strength is that we really feel how we are connected with other people. But if you're only always connected and merged with other people, you give away all the rest of yourself, or you don't attend to yourself. And in order to attend to yourself, you have to have a place where you end, where they end, you begin. And so then you have your own yard, so to speak, and then you take ownership of that, and it defines you, and then it kind of helps you feel where your limits are. And then once you find what your limits are, you can find your potentialities inside the boundaries. So that's basically what a boundary is. And it's really interesting to me that everybody knows, a baby knows, in some sense. There's certain boundaries they know. Like, for example, early child abuse. You'd think that you could do whatever you wanted to a child and they would never notice because you're teaching them, right? But instinctively, they know. And they'll carry that violation with them in their nervous system. Don't you think that's weird? Like, we really are designed to understand these things, and the instinctive nature of interactions and of, in a sense, ownership and sovereignty over our own bodies and our own things, whatever they are, our thoughts, our feelings, our bodies. It's wired in. So whenever a boundary is crossed against someone's will, it registers in the nervous system and can do damage, for sure. So I just think that's really interesting to notice. And when you don't notice, or when you've overridden, so a lot of us grow up not knowing where we end and others begin, and kind of flowing into that exchange and not knowing ourselves. And allowing our boundaries to be violated, and not really connecting our awareness with the awareness of our nervous system. This is possible to happen, okay? So, and very, very common, because a lot of parenting has, unfortunately, is about teaching children to discount and override their instincts. And so then you're kind of splitting. This is how we get split in two, in terms of our head sort of trying to figure out what's going on, and the body kind of freaking out or sending up the alarms, and we're like, what's the problem, you know, and creating buffer zones between those things. But once you can kind of start to become aware of your boundaries, what is actually already there, and then ones that you have been giving over or letting down or not enforcing, then when that starts to happen, then you start to feel a sense of personal power. And when I'm talking power here, I'm talking about personal, lest we get too philosophical about power. So, I don't know, what else do you want to say about boundaries? It's really kind of tricky too, because I'm just trying to think of some good examples.
Can you also have too many and too, be too cut off and,
Yes.
and guarded off? I mean,
Would that be a
Self-protective.
wall rather than a boundary?
Yes.
Yes. In general, any of the 4 quadrants can be overindulged, over-functioning, inflated, or under-functioning, deflated. And so when you have an over-functioning warrior, one that's out of balance, then you have people that are brutal or aggressive or hostile or walled off, inaccessible, maybe
Taskmaster.
yeah, rigid, driving, aggressive. If you're underinflated, then you're going to feel ineffective, powerless, maybe victimized. That kind of stuck malaise, just that ineffective inability to act. And so, what was the question again?
You were asking about boundaries being tricky. And then the
Oh.
question was about
Oh, boundaries,
having too
yeah.
many
Can
or
they
having
be too
wall-like boundaries.
strong?
The reason I don't even really like to talk about boundaries is because I was a therapist in the 80s. That's all we talked about, and people were always forever, I'm setting a boundary here, I'm gonna set a boundary here, and it just annoyed the crap out of me, I'm sorry. We just were so proud of our freaking boundaries, and they were more conceptual than anything, and it was just the weirdest thing, because so when you start to get a concept like that, then you start practicing it with your magician. And so then we'd in relationships, we say, I'm gonna set a boundary here, or I need you to respect my boundary here, or I need a boundary here. Like, you're giving your power to the person. I'm gonna state my boundary, but you're responsible for keeping it.
Yeah.
That's dumb. and that was, I think that's a lot of what's really frustrating to me about these things, you know, so we just think saying it, that's the thing. Or that we have to say it, and now I'm setting boundaries. No, you're just prancing around. So, knowing your boundaries and setting them is an internal function that comes from within. So if you know where they are, you don't have to declare them. You know, and everyone knows them. You know, because it brings your power inside, and then you carry it with you. So if you're a boundary person and you walk in the room, everybody kind of gets it. It's not that you're overpowering anybody. It's not that you're certainly not going, here's my boundary. Here's my boundary. I have a boundary about that. That's just ridiculous. That's how the magician works. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say that, overstating boundaries is probably a symptom of lack of personal power, than an assertion of personal power.
Probably.
But the other thing I was gonna say back to when you were talking about tricky boundaries, I think a child, asking for a friend, I think a child.
Okay, theoretically speaking.
I think a child growing up with, lack of connection, lack of attachment, develops very unclear boundaries.
Yeah.
Because they have to invite attention on some level, to replace the lost connection or the attachment that wasn't there. And so, it becomes a very sort of murky understanding or a tricky understanding of what that's all about.
Yeah. If you think about it, if you think about a child coming into the world, all you have to bargain with, you just only have a few things to bargain with. And so power is one of them. And so the nature of the child and parent relationship should be that the one with the power is reaching down to empower the one without the power. This is the fiduciary relationship of adults to children. And so, but if that's not working, if that cycle isn't happening, and it's not going this way, then the child only has a few things, you know, it still has to instinctively, and these are instinctive things, it's not like they're sitting there thinking, but to stay connected, if that's the goal, what do you have to sell to buy that with? And so love and power, right, or good behavior, I'm trying to think, what do we offer up in order to buy these things? But they all depend, they all sort of infer that we weren't defended or protected in our own within our own boundaries. So then we're bartering all the time, which it should never be the job of a child. So of course we don't get boundaries because instinctively we've had to give them up. It was one of the few things that we had. So saying no or having your own ideas or obviously teaching a child how to have self-discipline is really important, but that's different than borrowing money from the kids' piggy bank to buy cigarettes or I don't know. There's a million ways child's boundaries can get violated. Or harvesting the goodness of the child to make yourself feel better so that they learn how to comfort mommy or daddy and you become really grateful and that forms a bond, but the child has bartered away the energy of their own heart in order to stay connected. So these kinds of exchanges, but they have to do all about boundaries. So if you're having anything to do with children, to help them notice where their boundaries are and help them stand in them or negotiate with them rather than just plow over them, or harvest from them something that really is yours to give to them, not theirs to give to you. It's all, see how it's kind of all about boundaries. So, anything else about boundaries you wanna mention, talk about?
Sure We've talked about them a lot.
I know.
I do think that
Makes
one
me
of the
tired.
trickiest relationships for me with boundaries is my kids, though.
Yeah, I was
And
gonna
not-
say, talk more about that.
And not necessarily, not necessarily, theirs, but mine with them, because I think especially as they're, because it seems like it's your natural, just the job of a parent is to like give them boundaries, but also to like be connected and love them and all those pieces. But then as they get to be older, and especially adults, I feel like I'm really struggling with that, like almost, and I probably overthink it, but like my daughter and I are so connected, that I'm like, are we too connected? Like do we talk too much? Does she ask me too many questions, and where would I set that? And I think it's a tricky relationship, especially as they get to be adults to me.
Yeah.
So I don't really know what to do with that. So please.
Me neither. But when you were talking, I was thinking about an example of driving. I was in the car with my daughter, and she was driving. So she's probably 33 years old, 32, 33 years old. She's driving, and I'm telling her how to get places and how to drive. And it occurs to me that she's an adult, that she drives all the time without me, and that maybe I should stop that and let her do it how she wants to do it. I mean, that's a very simple example, and it's not like I was very overbearing as a parent, but it's these habits. And so as parents, learning how to know your child enough so that negotiation that happens between where you're teaching them everything, and you're helping them achieve self-discipline, but then you have to give them power and give them more authority and give them more freedom so that they own that, and then the parent's role has to shift or should shift. And if it doesn't, then you have all these power struggles and all these stories that my generation particularly has about. I think of one with Ted's family, how his older brother, when he came into his power, Dad wasn't ready to give up that power, didn't have the maturity to do that. So it wasn't until he was big enough to resist getting a haircut from Dad, who said, "You gotta get your haircut." This back in the 70s, where long hair was just an abomination. "You gotta get your haircut." And he said, "I'm not getting my hair." "Well, you damn well are." And then a little, struggle ensues, and Dad figures out, oh, my son is bigger than me, and I don't have the power to enforce anymore. So they're so important. Those tasks, those developmental tasks, are so important that a child will risk a lot to do that.
I guess that's why.
I'd tell you some stories about my other child, but unless he wants to share
You can
them.
talk about the negotiation thing. I mean, that's kind of an interesting boundary lesson. Was.
Well, the one I have was. I'm not sure which one you mean.
I don't.
There are so many.
Well, the one that sticks in my mind that some people just have an innate sense of their boundaries, and Justin has always been one of them, and kind of taught us a lot about that because he just instinctively knew them. So I just remember this time in I think you were 13. I can just see it. I was sitting in the family room, or I was in the study, I can't remember where I was, and you came in, you'd had an altercation with your father, and you came in and you started complaining about Dad in some way, and I kind of just put the broken record on. Well, you have to talk to your father about that. Well, I think you should talk to your father about that. Well, you probably should talk to your father about that. I must have said that 150 times. And that day, he decided he was going to go talk to his father about that. So went out of the study and into the living room, I think it was, where Ted was sitting. I can't remember where this happened, but basically the opening line was, "Dad, we need to talk. I need you to respect me more." And then there ensued a conversation in the next 2 hours, man to man, basically, at exactly the right time. Like, how did he know? 13 is the time that you do that. How did you, there was no, nothing. You just instinctively knew what needed to happen and initiated the conversation. That's warrior energy.
I have kind of a funny story.
You don't, what?
I don't remember
You
that.
don't remember that? Oh my God.
I'm sorry.
It was like
big deal.
the turning point of your whole life.
It was honestly not traumatic though, so.
So, yeah,
because
it
it
was
wasn't
not
traumatic.
traumatic. It was a task,
No
it got
scars
done,
left behind.
checked off the list.
Oh, I guess it seems.
It ran the gamut, you know, from all kinds of things, but it started with, and I remember, word for word, Dad, you and I need to talk. I need you to respect me more. So that was basically standing up for saying, hey, here's my line.
All I remember is that I was kind of full of it at that age too, so, you know, I was like, I probably needed to show more respect too, so that's the part I remember.
Yeah.
Well, and then Judy, that one time we were in Minnesota, had noticed that you negotiate a lot.
Oh.
And she was saying, you know, when he grows up, he's gonna be a negotiator for the White House. But Mr. Wiggin, because at that time he still couldn't see his arms.
So at age 4, he was negotiating everything and just instinctively knew how to do that. So here's a kid who knows at least where he wants his boundaries to be, you know, and negotiating all kinds of things. So he decided he was going to be an arms negotiator when he grew up.
But I love that you saw that as positive, and you said you can be a negotiator for the White House rather than stop being argumentative.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
For
Yeah,
sure.
or just
So
eat your food
good-
and shut up.
Good on you.
Right?
Yeah. So my husband's always been way better at boundaries than I
Oh,
have.
I
He's
can
actually-
imagine.
He's actually really good at it. It's actually he's very healthy with it, so it's kind of annoying to watch, but, but so he started teaching me about boundaries when I was, after we were married, like, and he always used percentages. He'd be like, you need to be a 50% friend to that person. I'd be like, because I didn't register, because I was like, no, you have to be 100% friend to everybody all the time. And he's like, no, you can't. And so he was teaching our kids that whole thing when they started learning about percentages. And so when my daughter was in 5th grade, he's teaching her about this girl, Rebecca, who was a problem and would kind of hook Katie into drama and stuff. He's like, you need to be like a 40% friend to Rebecca, you know, and so with this thing, so she comes home the next day. So I told Rebecca that I can only be a 40% friend. Oh, we missed that
That's
piece.
right.
So I actually told her.
Yeah.
I'm gonna set a boundary
I have a
here.
boundary.
Right. I'm setting a boundary here.
Yeah, exactly.
What else about boundaries? Because I probably we should talk about anger because,
We got one
You have
more.
somebody.
oh, yeah.
I like to say.
Tell me your name again, I forgot.
Edna.
Edna.
In that boundaries piece, for me, you know, everybody finds what works for them. But in the boundaries for me, it was the circle around your feet. And who's in the circle? Because, you know, we let a lot of people in our circle and mess us up. So with my circle, I'm in the circle, and because we are a 3-part being, body, soul, and spirit, we live in this body, but if we are saved, we have our spirit. And our spirit is the one in connection to who Christ is in us, is at work. So while I'm in the circle, the Spirit of God is in that circle with me. He's the one that I get the direction from. And with the direction from him, then I can treat people how Christ would treat them. And still own my humanness. And still fall short sometimes. But I get right back in, realizing it's me and God, and God loves everybody, and he has purpose for everybody. And yes, we need to respect people, but at the same time, don't let all these people in your circle other than you and God.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about basically, so what I wanted to talk about before we go to anger is just a brief bit about the alliances here. So what you're describing there is the alliance between the warrior and the sovereign, basically. So the the sovereign warrior connection is really the most powerful. So the sovereign is the part of you that's connected to God, connected to the universe, connected to what's larger than yourself, and has access to those kind of resources, and has the wisdom to know who you are, what you're for. And so when the warrior is in service to a healthy sovereign connection, then you're moving with purpose into the world. The warrior can also be in alliance with these others too. So when the warrior is in connection with a healthy magician, then then you've got the typical, what's your goal? What are the steps to achieve your goal? Keep your goal out here, take the steps. We've been taught that a million times. Annoys me to death, but it makes sense. When the warrior is connected to lover, then the ways you want to express or stay connected to others, it can implement that. So I wanted to just make this bigger just for a second. So in our Western society, in the last many years, the alliance that's been working for the most part is this magician-warrior alliance. So if it's healthy, that's great. But when it's not, then it's coming up with schemes to benefit whoever, and then using power to get them done. And so this is part of, I think it seeps into corporate culture, it seeps into, of course, military culture, it seeps into political culture, it seeps into, it underlies and permeates so much of our church culture. Our society right now is part of why we're sick and have been sick for a quite long time, because there's no lover and there's no sovereign. It's just gotten really, really mean and devoid of heart. And anyway, I think that's just, this is what we're seeing. And so reaction sometimes to that goes this direction. You can see that with social justice, if you want to. So social justice is a connection between lover and warrior, that kind of alliance. And of course, either one of those can go off in either direction. But it's just, I think it's just really interesting to see that. And then when you've got sovereign warrior, then you've got a healthy sort of system moving. So you can know what you're about, act in congruence with that, and execute everything you need to execute. Okay? So anger is kind of the gateway. If your warrior is a little emaciated and you're wanting to listen, the best way to connect with that is anger. And I just want to say a few things about anger. I think I have 13 things I normally say about anger, but there's a few that are really important. Of course, anger can be destructive. Of course, it can get out of control. Of course, it's not pleasant to feel. Of course, all those things. And if you were a different group of people, we would spend a lot of time talking about that. But you guys are not those kind of people. You guys are probably good-hearted, good-natured people who don't want to hurt people. So good-natured people who don't want to hurt people usually have a problem with anger, in that we're scared of it, we don't like it, we don't want it, we don't approve of it. And we've been taught not to feel those things. So for that reason, I've probably spent the last 15 years of my life learning how to be angry, okay? I'm angry! And own my anger and let my anger kind of help pull me out of that kind of stuckness. So, but first I needed to know that anger wasn't just a sin I was committing in my heart. Anger, at its core, it's a God-given emotion. It's a thing that we're wired with. It's a signal, very powerful signal that tells you that something important to you is being violated. And you will feel angry just like that. It's like the tripwire of a boundary, if you want to call it that. Or it's illuminating some of your values. So when you look at anger that way, then you can instead of just pushing it away or running away from it, you can stop and ask yourself, what is it that's important to me, and how has it been violated? Now, you can get angry because you have some pretty stupid values. So if your pride is one of your values and that gets violated, you're going to get mad, So then you could decide whether that value is something you want to keep or something you need to look at. But so much of our deep anger has to do with a sense of powerlessness and a sense of violation of things that we know in our heart and our spirit to be right or wrong. And so when we find ourselves really angry, it's important to listen for that. Make sense? So I want to just give you permission there on that one, because that really set me free. The other thing about anger you've probably heard is that it's usually the first, it's a secondary, they call it a secondary emotion, which means that you're channeling other emotional energy into your anger because it's a more powerful feeling. So if you're sad, or if you're afraid, in particular fear, we don't like feeling those feelings because they make us feel powerless, but anger gives us energy to act. So a lot of the first time you think there might be something going on emotionally, if you get angry, just you might want to stop and ask yourself, is it shielding me from some other emotion that I don't want to feel? I know you've heard that a million times. Raise your hand if you've heard that a million times. Thank you. Okay. And there was something else about anger that anger though is energy, and this is why it's so useful, why it's the gateway to the warrior, is because it has energy. So if you're sad, you're either crying or you're depressed in some way. But if you're angry, you can feel it in your body, and it feels like power. It actually is energy. And so that's why we want to be able to have a good relationship with anger, because we need its energy to act sometimes. And sometimes we won't act until we get angry, and that would be me. If I get angry, then, like, I can put up with all kinds of stuff for a long, long time, but once I get angry, it's kind of done. That it's up, and I gotta figure out what to do. And I always handle my anger appropriately.
Good boundaries.
Action.
Never lie.
I never lie, and I never just explode or start yelling or start, pounding.
Or do it sideways.
Or do it or be passive aggressive. Never. Okay, so anyway, all of that. Any more you want to hear about? You want to talk about anger, or you want to? We have 10 minutes left.
Talk more about anger.
Turn inward.
Sure, turn inward, or also, it's nice to know the benefits of anger, but how do you actually use it? Like, how do you turn that into action without doing
hurting,
the
yeah.
wrong actions, like sideways? How do you use it better?
Well,
Or
there's
here's
the
a
social
question.
justice piece.
I could ask for a friend. So, if you're trying to get out of a pit, that you're just stuck and you're sad and everything tells you your plan is not sustainable, you shall surely die. Would it be useful to dredge up some anger and say, well, fuck that,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah, that's my preferred method. It's kind of, you're kind of hypothetical.
that wasn't hypothetical. That was a friend.
No, I mean it's not a specific kind of situation, but I kind of heard you say, what about anger turned inward, which is what I was taught was one of the definitions of depression. And I think that it's a fairly good one for a lot of people, and certainly was for me. So depression is basically, you know what depression is. Everything is dampened and power is gone. But there's still some energy moving, and for some people, that anger, that action energy, that frustrated powerlessness gets turned on the self in the form of shame. And a whole whole world can be talked about shame, but read Brene Brown.
Mhm.
That bitch. But that's that's a really nasty warrior, self-inflicted warrior energy is shame. Because shame basically is the idea that there's something wrong with me, inherently wrong, that I can't ever fix. So it has this sense of being just defective. And then the cause of all the problems that you're feeling. So it's not all of what shame is. Shame is an emotion where you feel exposed as defective. But the condition of shame is basically this punishing warrior energy. So you look out here and you see what you want, you're not getting it. Then instead of being able to solve the problem like a healthy warrior magician might do, you've already decided you're the problem. And what will help is punishment somehow. Or else you're just really trying to get out of it. You're circling around this. There's something wrong with you, or else you would be XYZ. So you can see how this is just a recipe for depression. And the worst kind of depression too. I mean, shame kills people. If it's really loud, if it's some air, some rescue, because really it's the logical conclusion. If that's true, you are completely defective and you're losing out on everything, and you've already projected that into the future where there's no hope for you and you're hopelessly broken. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that death is the answer, right? This is how that leads to suicide.
Or homicide.
Or homicide.
Yeah.
Would an example of that be just the, like totally off the rails self-discipline, the self-punitive, like either anorexic or a bulimic?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good, eating disorders really are a kind of a warrior gone bad.
Rogue.
You know, like, can't fix anything, but I do have control over what comes in my mouth. Or I can, so I put it in there, but then I can't let it be digested, so I have to spew it out again, you know.
Or even the exercise bulimia.
Yes. Yeah.
Self-injury.
Self-injury, yeah. Yeah, it's warrior turned on yourself. Something, and it comes out of desperation, something you can do, which you can.
That example of the anger kind of turning things around. Several years ago, 9 or 10 years ago, I was in a deep depression. I mean, it was bad, and I couldn't really get off my butt to do anything. And I read a book, and I can't remember the author, but he was talking about, he says if you're depressed, you're probably thinking this, and he listed about 12 statements, and every one of them was running through my head 24 hours a day. I mean, I was reading those, I'm like, yes, that's exactly, and I wasn't thinking of it, I was thinking, well, that's exactly who I am, you know, because I thought of them all as the truth. And he said, okay, I want you to stop and think, if you were sitting across the table from God, would he say any of those things to you? Or is that more something like, I don't know, maybe Satan would say to you?
I don't know.
I know. I got pissed, just instantaneously. I was like, no way am I ever going to listen to that again. And, you know, not that I never have again, but, you know, that was like the catalyst. It was like, wow, yeah. It helped a lot.
Phyllis, you kind of touched on it, but could we go through the inflated, and what that looks like?
Yeah, I did write them down. Yeah, inflated warrior is, you get hostility, aggression, over, like walled off, kind of defensive. Other synonyms for that, basically, yeah, you're just too, and invasive. Like too much warrior, you can be invasive. Dismissive. Anything that's about over initiating or over ending, you know, or in between, violating in between. And then underinflated is powerless, victimized, what's that kind of resigned, stuck? Kinda lost where we were. Was I going anywhere? Or just like?
We were kinda talking
Shame.
about that turned inward, that
Oh, yeah, yeah.
that warrior
Shame.
turned inward and
So,
actions of shame.
getting to know your warrior, I mean, these are complicated things. There's not gonna be like 5 easy steps to invigorating your warrior. But one thing that I have learned in battling depression of my own is that anytime you can do something, it is empowering. Doing is power, or power enables doing, which duh, but I think that we spend so much time thinking and feeling that we don't know anything else. We try to solve all our problems that way. And so doing something, even if it's standing up, taking a breath, getting a drink of water, or walking around the block, it starts to, just shifts you. It changes the channel in your brain into something that's a little bit more productive and opens you to a new environment and activates your senses, which is getting out of that whole, I suck, something bad's gonna happen to me, malaise. So even if that's all you're capable of doing, it's an active warrior, do something, do anything. And usually it's the simplest things that set you on the path, even though you don't know where you're headed. We wanna know the future, we wanna know we're not gonna feel this way, we wanna know how things are gonna be. Most of the time we can't know those things, but we can go, well, I'm sitting, I could be standing, I could be looking at blue sky, I could be taking a walk, I could be anything else. And those sometimes are the most powerful steps you can take, even though the rest of you is like, what the hell good is this gonna do? So, yay for warrior.
I think kind of what Hope was saying too about social justice is, like, a lot of us have been really angry since November, and especially since January. And so you can either live in this place of being angry and sad, or you can go, I'm just gonna make a phone call, or I'm just gonna go write a letter, or I'm gonna, try to do something that feels like you're moving forward, and it does shift things.
Yeah,
It
it
changes you,
really
even if it's
does.
something this big, it feels like at least I'm not just stuck in this place of sadness or anger.
I've done that even in therapy. I'll get in a place and I'm just stuck, and I actually get up and walk around the room and come back and sit down, and then I can address it a little bit better.
I wish we could really see what's actually happening in those moments neurologically, because I think we'd be surprised and we would do that a lot more.
I think I've been in kind of a spin of shame. It's just an example, I guess, of doing something, of this spin that we're talking about. Like in the last couple of years, I've gained like 60 pounds. And I've been like after myself lately. I'm like, you gotta do something. You gotta do, if you really cared about it, then you wouldn't eat that. Or if you really cared about it, you'd be out running, or at least take a walk, or at least do this, or at least do that. And I think that's kind of a spin of shame over my warrior kind of telling me, that I need to do this, or I need to do that. Well, just recently, in the last couple of days actually, I decided that I will not lose any weight, and I just kind of know this about myself, and I didn't know why, but this kind of explains it. I'm not gonna lose any weight or be able to get back in shape until I'm okay with the skin I'm in. And that's just the way it is, and I don't know why. I could go totally anorexic, or I could go totally, boxing or something like that. But boxing might actually help me out a little bit. But no, I'm serious. Now I understand little bit more wide. But, I think that, that helps a lot. Understand why that thought helped.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, it kind of illuminates a lot of things.
Can I
guess,
say one thing about that?
yeah,
Okay, when you were talking, the messages didn't feel like loving warrior messages. They felt like shaming warrior messages. Like, if you knew better, that didn't feel like an invitation. It felt like a punishment, like a negative judgment against self. And I do that too, and it's really hard to decide, okay then, I'll go exercise, you know, that's a shutdown kind of statement, and I know it from my, you know, I relate to it personally. The inner critic, right?
yeah, the inner critic. It's 11, so if you need to leave, feel free to go. I'm okay to hang out, but I just wanna not hold you here captive.
You erased wound from the board. What is can you just say in a nutshell what the warrior's primary wound is?
It's a boundary violation
Okay.
of some sort, or not supported or taught.
So that thing where the parent where you bargain away your power.
Yeah, it's some kind of wound to your instinctive boundary setting thing. So either it was violated, or you were neglected, or you ended up being harvested, basically. Yeah. Okay, so thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.